Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to sift through stacks of research and bring you the core insights.
Today we're tackling something really interesting. It's a paradox almost.
Yeah, how can something meticulously designed to be rational, totally logical, end up being completely wrong?
It's a question that really gets to the heart of how we think about intelligence decision-making. Not just for us, but for big organizations, even those complex algorithms running things behind the scenes.
Right. It brings to mind this story, maybe you've heard something like it. A major airline. They roll out this super advanced fare algorithm, state-of-the-art, its only job, squeeze maximum revenue from every single flight. And on paper, this thing was brilliant.
Looked perfect.
Totally. Adjusting prices on the fly based on demand forecasts, made sure no seat went unsold if someone would pay. It followed all the optimal pricing rules you could think of, conventionally rational, right?
The absolute picture of it. And
yet, within just a few months, the airline starts losing money.
A total flop. Financially disastrous.
A complete mess. And when they actually dug into why, well, the reasons were pretty revealing.
Passengers weren't passive.
No. They figured it out. Clever, adaptive. They learned to game the system, basically just waiting for last-minute price drops.
While competitors jumped in.
Exactly. Saw the opening and aggressively undercut them on key routes. But maybe the biggest thing, the sort of subtle killer, was how that algorithm's narrow focus, just profit, 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 it just killed customer goodwill.
People felt ripped off.
Yeah, like the airline was just trying to milk them for every last cent.
And the core issue there, the really telling part, is that the model itself, the logic inside that algorithm, it assumed a static world.
Right.
It didn't factor in passengers changing their behavior strategically or competitors reacting. It assumed the playing field wouldn't change. Those were the hidden assumptions.
The unspoken rules it was built on.
Exactly. And those faulty premises turned this supposedly optimal solution into a really costly mistake. It's a perfect illustration of our main theme today. Rationality is always conditional.
It depends.
It depends on your assumptions, the specific context you're in, the real-world constraints you can't ignore.
So that's our mission for you today. We're going to unpack this. First, we'll look at what rationality traditionally means in theory, the classical ideal version.
But then term.
Then we'll pivot. How do actual human decisions, our decisions, often stray from those ideals? We'll bring in some heavy hitters here.
Herbert Simon, Kahneman and Tversky, Steven Pinker, Gerd Gigerenzer. Thinkers who've all argued, in different ways, that you have to understand rationality within the context of real-world limits.
Our goal is to show you that rational isn't some absolute thing. It's always rational under certain conditions.
And crucially, we want this to be practical for you. So by the end, we'll give you a kind of checklist. A tool to help you spot those hidden assumptions behind any supposedly rational model or decision.
So you can apply this directly. Let's dive in. Okay, so to really get why rationality sometimes goes off the rails, we first need a baseline. We need to understand the theoretical benchmarks.
Right, the so-called normative models of rational decision-making. These are the ideals, the shoulds, against which we often measure irrational behavior.
And in classical economics, decision theory. The starting point is often this idea of the perfectly rational agent.
Homo economicus, the economic man. That's a hypothetical construct, obviously, a theoretical ideal.
And what's this ideal agent like?
Well, picture a supercomputer, but one with a really clear goal. Maximize utility, always.
Yeah.
Get the greatest possible benefit or satisfaction from every single choice.
Sounds pretty demanding. What kind of powers does it have?
Complete information. It knows all the options, all the consequences, no uncertainty, no unknowns, and unlimited cognitive power. It can process all that information instantly, flawlessly. Plus, its preferences are crystal clear, totally consistent, never waver.
So it wouldn't, prefer coffee today and tea tomorrow for no reason?
Not unless the underlying factors changed in a way that rationally altered the utility calculation. It would assign probabilities to uncertain events perfectly, obeying all the rules of logic and probability.
Meaning it wouldn't make basic probability mistakes, like thinking a coin is due for heads.
Absolutely not. It wouldn't hold contradictory beliefs that could guarantee a loss in a betting scenario, for instance.
Which leads to this idea of Bayesian coherence. Sounds intense.
It is rigorous. It means their beliefs have no internal contradictions, no violations of probability theory. And based on those perfect beliefs, Their choices always maximize expected utility.
Expected utility?
Yeah.
So the value of an outcome weighted by its probability.
Precisely. And this whole ideal is formalized by things like the Dutch book theorem.
Okay, unpack that a bit. The Dutch book theorem.
It basically says if an agent's beliefs, their credences or confidence levels don't follow the basic rules of probability, or their choices don't maximize expected value, then a clever bookie could set up a series of bets against them.
And the agent is guaranteed to lose.
Guaranteed to lose money no matter what happens. It's a mathematical proof of inconsistency. And by these strict normative standards, that inconsistency makes the agent irrational.
So these classical models, coming from thinkers like von Neumann, Morgenstern, the Bayesian tradition, they define rationality as pure optimality.
Exactly. It's not just about making a good choice. It's about making the single best possible choice to achieve your goal. Expected utility theory says you pick the option with the absolute highest expected utility.
No compromises.
And Bayesian rationality says your beliefs must form a coherent web, updating perfectly with new evidence according to Bayes' rule.
So deviations are seen as failures, like preferring A over B, B over C, but then C over A, that breaks transitivity. That's irrational in this view.
Or believing that the probability of X happening plus the probability of X not happening is, say, 110%. That violates fundamental probability axioms. Also irrational.
It's crucial to remember, though, these are normative models.
Yes. Prescriptive. They say how an ideal agent ought to decide. They were never really meant as descriptions of how actual humans think.
But for a long time in economics and decision theory, this was the definition of rationality.
Well, yeah, actually.
Unconditional.
You either met the standard or you were wrong. Full stop.
And that absolutism, that really strict ideal, it kind of set the stage for a big clash with reality, didn't it?
It absolutely did. It created what psychologists later called the descriptive gap, when they started looking closely at how people actually make decisions and found something very, very different.
Okay, so we've got the ideal, homo economicus, the perfect optimizer. Now, let's crash that ideal into the wall of reality.
Right. Because the big empirical finding, the one that really shook things up, is that humans.
Well, we often don't follow those rules of classical rationality.
And it's not just random mistakes.
Not at all. The deviations are systematic, predictable patterns. This is where the groundbreaking work of Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky comes in back in the 1970s.
Two giants in the field.
Absolutely. Cognitive psychologists who ran these incredibly clever experiments. And they uncovered dozens of ways our actual decision-making consistently violates that normative ideal.
Instead of optimizing, we use shortcuts. Exactly. Mental shortcuts, heuristics. And we're heavily influenced by how choices are presented, the framing. This revealed that descriptive gap.
The gap between how the models say we should choose and how we actually do choose.
Precisely. And maybe the most famous framework nailing this down is prospect theory.
Ah, yes, prospect theory, 1979, a landmark paper.
Revolutionary, really. It showed fundamentally that people don't evaluate outcomes in absolute terms, like total wealth. We evaluate them relative to a reference point.
Usually where we are right now, the status quo.
Typically, yes. Yeah. And the killer finding, the core principle, is loss aversion.
Losses hurt more than gains feel good.
Much more. Their research suggested losing, say, $100 feels roughly twice as bad as gaining $100 feels good. It's a huge psychological asymmetry.
Twice as painful. That's really significant. And that leads to this sort of lopsided value function they described.
It does. If you were to graph it, the curve for losses drops way steeper than the curve for gains rises, visually representing that pain of loss.
Yeah, and this affects our risk tolerance.
Massively. It means we tend to be risk averse when we're thinking about potential gains.
Like choosing the sure thing over a gamble, even if the gamble has a higher average payout.
Exactly. That classic experiment. Most people take a certain $450 over a 50-50 shot at $1,000. Even though the gamble's expected value is $500, we prefer the sure gain.
But flip the script. Frame it as losses.
And everything changes. Preferences completely reverse. If you offer people a choice between a sure loss of $500 or a 50-50 gamble between losing $1,100 and losing nothing, most people choose the gamble.
They become risk-seeking to avoid the loss.
Right. They'll take a bigger potential loss just for the chance to avoid any loss. Now, from a classical perspective, this is irrational. The framing gain versus loss shouldn't matter if the final outcomes are the same, but it clearly powerfully does.
So that value function curve, it's not a straight line like classical theory assumes. It's kinked at the reference point, steeper for losses.
Steeper for losses, showing loss aversion. And it's concave for gains.
Meaning we're risk-averse for gains.
And convex for losses.
Meaning we're risk-seeking, trying to avoid losses. It's a description that deviates from the ideal but actually matches how people behave.
And prospect theory was just the beginning. They documented other biases too. The framing effect, how you describe identical outcomes, changes the choice.
Like 90% survival rate versus 10% mortality rate for surgery, same outcome, different reaction.
Totally. Or reference dependence, whether $50,000 feels like a lot or a little, depends entirely on whether you expected $10,000 or $100,000. It's all relative.
And probability weighting, that's a weird one.
It is fascinating. We tend to overweight small probability.
Which explains lottery tickets. Tiny chance, huge payoff feels more likely than it is.
And we underweight large probabilities.
Which might explain why we buy insurance for rare disasters, maybe underweighting the probability that nothing bad will happen.
It contributes to both phenomena, yes. Both lottery tickets and insurance often have negative expected financial value, yet they sell incredibly well because of how we psychologically weight those probabilities. All these patterns break classical rules but describe us.
And these aren't just lab quirks, they show up everywhere.
Absolutely. Loss aversion explains why investors hang on to losing stocks too long. Selling means realizing the loss, which is painful.
The disposition effect.
Exactly. And framing affects medical decisions, consumer choices, political opinions. You name it.
So it really forces the question, are we just irrational, flawed machines? Or is something else going on? Is this behavior maybe rational in a different way once you factor in our context, our limits?
That became the crucial fork in the road. One path, taken by behavioral economics, said essentially, yes, humans are predictably irrational. Let's understand these biases to design better systems or nudge behavior.
Using the biases for good, hopefully.
Hopefully. But another path emerged, defending human reasoning in a way. It argued that maybe rationality itself needs to be redefined, relativized to our constraints. Maybe our minds are doing the best possible job given limited time, information, and processing power.
And that leads us straight to Herbert Simon.
And his revolutionary idea of bounded rationality.
Okay, so if we're not homo economicus, the perfect rational calculator, then what are we? This is where Herbert Simon comes in, a real polymath economist, psychologist, computer scientist.
And someone who challenged those classical ideas of perfect rationality way back in the 1950s. A real pioneer.
He introduced this concept of bounded rationality. What's the core idea?
It's basically a more realistic description of how real agents, humans, organizations, even AI, actually make decisions. Simon argued, famously, that we need to replace that global rationality of economic man with something more grounded.
Something compatible with our actual limits.
Exactly. Compatible with the information access and computational capacities we actually possess and the kinds of complex environments we actually live in. Our rationality is bounded, limited.
And the implications are huge. Real people, real organizations. We have finite information. We don't know everything.
Limited time. We can't deliberate forever.
And limited brain power or computational power. We can't analyze every possibility down to the last detail.
Right. So Simon said, expecting global optimization, always finding the absolute single best solution, isn't just unrealistic. It might not even be the smartest thing to aim for. Rationality has to be defined relative to those bounds.
Which leads to his famous idea of satisficing.
Yes, satisficing as opposed to optimizing. It's a crucial distinction.
So satisficing isn't about finding the best option.
No, it's about finding a good enough option. Decision makers search through alternatives until they find one that meets some minimum standard, some acceptability threshold or aspiration level.
And then they stop searching.
Then they stop. They choose that option. Done.
Simon argued this is actually more efficient, right?
Yeah.
Especially for complex problems.
Much more efficient. Often. Think about real-world decisions. Searching every single possibility is often impossible or would take way too long.
Like buying a house or choosing a job or even finding a parking spot. You don't check every single spot in the city.
Or even shopping for that airline ticket, like we discussed earlier. You set criteria budget, travel time, maybe an airline preference, and you pick the first flight that meets them. You don't analyze every conceivable routing. You satisfice.
And Simon saw this not as a failure, but as a rational adaptation.
Absolutely. He formally defined it that way. The costs of finding the theoretical optimum costs in time, mental energy, maybe even money, often outweigh the extra benefit you'd get from that optimum compared to a good enough solution found quickly.
So the good enough solution found fast might actually give you higher overall utility, considering the search costs.
Precisely. especially for a bounded agent.
That makes a lot of evolutionary sense, too.
It does. Think about survival. An organism that makes a pretty good decision, quickly grabs some food, escapes a predator, is probably more likely to survive and reproduce than one that spends ages analyzing every single detail to find the perfect morsel or escape route, and maybe gets eaten in the process.
So our brains might have evolved these heuristics, these shortcuts, that satisfice because optimization just wasn't practical or adaptive in many ancestral environments, diminishing returns.
And it leads to this fascinating paradox. Pursuing optimization at all costs can itself become irrational if the cost of optimizing is too high.
It's not just intuitive either. There's a computational basis for this, too.
Definitely. Many real-world decision problems fall into a category computer scientists call NP-hard.
Meaning they get incredibly complex, incredibly fast as the problem size grows.
Exponentially complex, like the traveling salesperson problem finding the shortest route through many cities. Checking every possible route becomes computationally infeasible very quickly, even for supercomputers. Chess is another example.
So for these kinds of problems, perfect optimization just isn't an option for bounded agents like us.
We have to use shortcuts, approximations, heuristics. As one computer scientist aptly put it, the computational infeasibility of perfect rationality in all but the simplest situations is a huge reason why bounded rationality is so important.
It forces us to acknowledge trade-offs.
Real-world rationality is all about trade-offs. Optimality versus speed. Precision versus simplicity. Ignoring those trade-offs might look rational on paper.
Like our airline algorithm.
But it could be completely self-defeating in practice.
Simon's work really shifted the focus then, not just on the outcome, but on the process.
Yes, it paved the way for thinking about process rationality, how the decision is actually made, given the constraints alongside the traditional focus on outcome rationality.
And this influences AI design?
Hugely. AI researchers constantly deal with resource-bounded agents, algorithms that have to make the best call possible within time or memory limits.
And neuroscience and psychology, too, understanding heuristics.
Exactly. The brain uses these shortcuts that generally work well in our typical environments, even if they sometimes lead to biases in artificial lab tasks. This naturally leads us to think about different kinds of rationality, particularly how rationality relates to the environment itself.
So we've moved from the perfect ideal to the bounded reality. But the picture gets even richer because rationality isn't just one thing. Researchers now talk about different types of rationality.
That's right. It's not monolithic. Understanding these distinctions helps us see even more clearly why rationality is always conditional, always context-dependent.
Okay, what are the key types?
Two really important distinctions are between instrumental rationality and epistemic rationality. And then there's the crucial concept of ecological rationality. Let's take them one by one.
All right. Instrumental rationality first.
This is sometimes called practical rationality.
Yeah.
Its focus is simple, making decisions that help you achieve your goals, whatever those goals may be.
So it's about the effectiveness of the means, not the worthiness of the ends.
Exactly. It doesn't judge your goals themselves. If your goal is to get rich, an instrumentally rational strategy is one that makes you the most money, given what you know and can do.
Like our airline algorithm again, its goal was short-term revenue. It was instrumentally rational for that goal.
Precisely. Its failure wasn't that it was illogical given its goal, but that its goal might have been too narrow, or didn't account for other important goals like customer trust or long-term viability.
And classical expected utility theory fits here.
It's primarily a model of instrumental rationality. Even Simon's bounded rationality can be seen as instrumentally rational. What's the best way to achieve my goal, given my limits?
Okay, so that's instrumental. What about epistemic rationality?
Epistemic rationality is all about belief. Its focus is on forming true beliefs about the world. It's about having an accurate map of reality.
The rationality of the scientist, the truth seeker.
That's a good way to think about it. It involves weighing evidence properly, updating your beliefs correctly when new information comes in, avoiding contradictions, and basically not believing things without good reason.
And this can diverge from instrumental rationality.
Oh, definitely. Think about it. It might be instrumentally useful to believe something false if it makes you happy or confident. Maybe believing you're definitely going to ace an exam reduces anxiety and helps you perform better, even if objectively your chances are lower. That's instrumentally useful, perhaps, but epistemically irrational if the belief isn't justified by evidence.
And the reverse.
You could have perfectly accurate beliefs, be very epistemically rational. But if you fail to act on those beliefs effectively to achieve your goals, you might be instrumentally foolish. You know the risks, but you don't take precautions.
How does this apply to the airline? Was its model epistemically rational?
Well, maybe partially. It learned patterns from historical data, which is a form of knowledge building. But if those patterns changed, or the model was too narrow and ignored crucial parts of the economic environment, like competitor actions, then its knowledge was incomplete. Its map of reality wasn't perfectly accurate, not epistemically perfect.
Okay, instrumental is about goals. Epistemic is about truth. What's the third type? Ecological rationality.
Yes, and this concept is really championed by this psychologist Gerd Gigerenzer and his colleagues. It shifts the perspective again.
How so?
Ecological rationality focuses on how well a strategy, or often a simple heuristic, performs in the specific environment in which it's actually used.
So it's about the fit between the strategy and the world.
Exactly. A decision rule is ecologically rational if it's well-suited, well-adapted to the structure of that environment. A simple rule of thumb might ignore a lot of information, yet still work incredibly well because the environment has certain patterns or statistical structures that the rule implicitly exploits.
This connects to Gigerenzer's famous phrase, less is more.
Precisely. He argues, quite provocatively, that simple heuristics, these fast, frugal, information-light shortcuts, can actually outperform complex, optimization-focused models, especially in environments that are uncertain, noisy, or where the future is hard to predict.
Why would ignoring information be better?
Because the heuristic is fit to the ecology. It picks up on the few cues that really matter in that specific context and avoids getting confused by irrelevant noise or trying to model complex interactions that might just be random fluctuations. It avoids overfitting.
Gigerenzer calls for a heuristic revolution, right?
Yeah.
Judging decision processes by how well they work in the real world.
Yes. Not just by whether they follow abstract logical axioms. He uses the recognition heuristic as a classic example.
The city population example.
That's the one. If you have to guess which of two cities is larger, and you've only heard of one of them, the heuristic says, guess the one you recognize.
It ignores everything else, geography, industry, whatever.
Totally ignores it. Yet in many real-world domains, this simple rule performs remarkably well, often matching or beating complex strategies that try to weigh multiple factors. Because generally, cities we've heard of tend to be larger. Recognition correlates with size in our informational environment.
So classical rationality would say ignoring information is bad, irrational.
But ecological rationality says, if that information wasn't actually helpful, or was even misleading, ignoring it can be perfectly rational, even smart, within that environment.
This also reframes biases.
It does. Gigerenzer suggests a bias isn't necessarily a flaw in our reasoning. It's often just a heuristic being applied in an environment it wasn't designed for, or where its usual assumptions don't hold. A mismatch between the tool and the task. In the right context, that same heuristic could be highly adaptive.
This pluralistic view helps make sense of things that seem paradoxical then, like buying a lottery ticket.
Let's break it down. Instrumentally irrational. Probably if your goal is purely maximizing money. Expected value is negative.
Epistemically irrational. Maybe if you genuinely believe you have a good chance of winning, ignoring the odds.
But ecologically rational. Perhaps. You could argue the small cost buys you something else. Hope, excitement, daydreams. A different kind of utility in the ecology of human emotions. Maybe it satisfies a psychological need.
So the judgment depends entirely on the lens you use.
Exactly. Which criterion are you prioritizing? Outcome maximization, belief accuracy, environmental adaptation. You'll also hear related terms like procedural rationality.
Following the right steps. Simon's focus.
Yes. Versus substantive rationality.
Getting the best outcome. The classical economics focus.
Right. And that pun, ecological rationality logic, tailored to the ecology. All these point to the same deep truth. Rationality isn't one single thing. It has to be evaluated relative to goals, knowledge, and crucially, the environment.
Okay, so we've got this much richer, more nuanced picture of rationality, bounded, plural, context-dependent. So where does that leave us as humans? How rational or irrational are we, really?
It's a huge question.
Yeah.
And it's easy to focus on the negatives, isn't it? All the documented biases, the logical fallacies we commit, the spread of misinformation and conspiracy theories.
Well,
You can easily conclude we're just fundamentally flawed.
yeah, some popular science writing definitely paints that picture. Like our brains are stuck in the Stone Age, hopelessly error-prone in the modern world.
But cognitive scientist Steven Pinker offers a different perspective, a more optimistic one, or at least a more balanced one.
In his book, Rationality.
Yes, from 2021. Pinker argues that humans actually have a remarkable capacity for rationality. It's just, well, it's unevenly applied. And it often needs the right conditions, the right tools to really come online.
What's his main argument for our underlying rationality?
One key point is context-dependent reasoning. He pushes back against those classic lab demonstrations of irrationality, the tricky logic puzzles, the weird probability problems.
He thinks they're misleading.
In a way, yes, because they're often very abstract, very unlike the kinds of concrete problems our minds evolve to handle day to day.
Like the Wasson card selection task, that famous logic puzzle.
Exactly. Presented with abstract letters and numbers, most people completely bomb it. It's notoriously difficult. But if you frame the exact same logical problem as a social rule.
Like checking if someone is underage drinking.
Right. Detecting cheating on a social contract. Suddenly people get it right much more often, almost intuitively.
So our reasoning is tuned for certain types of content.
Pinker argues yes. Content related to social exchange, figuring out causes and effects, navigating the physical world, things relevant to survival and cooperation. What looks like a logical failure in an artificial puzzle might just be our rational faculties getting confused by an unfamiliar format. As he puts it, when a content-rich version of the problem is used, one that resonates with our real-world experience, performance goes up.
So we're rational in our natural environments, or when problems are framed in ways that map onto those environments?
That's a big part of his argument. We succeed where our reasoning has adapted to succeed.
What's his second point?
The aggregate success of human rationality. Okay, individually we make mistakes, we have biases. But look at the big picture. Look at what humanity has achieved collectively through reason.
Science, technology, medicine.
Exactly. Pinker says we've discovered the laws of nature, transformed the planet, lengthened and enriched our lives, and not least articulated the very rules of rationality that we so often flout.
That's a powerful point. If we were truly hopelessly irrational, none of that would have happened.
Right. The fact that we can even identify and study cognitive biases is itself a triumph of rational analysis. Pinker offers a simple, pragmatic definition of rationality: the use of knowledge to attain a goal.
Using what we know to get what we want.
By that definition, humans are clearly rational. We do it all the time, in countless ways.
But there's a catch, isn't there? Our primitive intuitions.
There is a caveat. We have these intuitive ways of thinking, these shortcuts, that worked well ancestrally. But they can lead us astray in modern contexts that demand different kinds of reasoning.
Like thinking in terms of essences or purposes. Useful for understanding animals, maybe not so much for statistics.
Exactly. That intuitive mode can make us susceptible to pseudoscience or conspiracy theories when we really need statistical thinking or careful causal inference. Pinker's point is that the more abstract tools of rationality, formal logic, probability theory, the scientific method, these aren't innate.
They're learned skills.
They're like literacy or numeracy. He calls them unnatural skills that we have to consciously learn and cultivate. They don't come automatically with our Stone Age brains.
Okay, and his third point, rationality is goal-oriented.
Yes, and this is crucial for understanding seemingly irrational behavior. If someone holds a belief that seems completely bizarre or makes arguments that defy logic, Pinker says ask, what goal might that belief or behavior be serving for that person?
It might not be about truth.
Often, it's not primarily about epistemic rationality, truth. People might hold certain beliefs because they serve social or emotional goals, providing identity, signaling loyalty to a group, boosting self-esteem, protecting a cherished worldview.
Even if the belief itself isn't accurate?
Even then. Remember, Pinker says rationality is always in pursuit of a goal. And for an individual, that goal might be social belonging or status, not necessarily objective truth. This can lead to what he calls a tragedy of the rationality commons.
Okay, what's that? Sounds ominous.
It's the idea that on an individual level, it might be perfectly instrumentally rational, goal-serving for people to adopt and broadcast beliefs that signal loyalty to their tribe or group, even if those beliefs are factually questionable. It gets them social points.
But if everyone does that?
If everyone prioritizes signaling loyalty over seeking truth, then the commons, our shared public discourse, our collective ability to solve problems based on evidence gets degraded. The whole system becomes less truth-tracking.
So what's rational for the individual can be irrational for the group or for the goal of finding truth.
Exactly. It highlights again that conditional nature. Rationality depends on the goal and the level of analysis.
So summing up Pinker, we have rational capacity. Civilization proves it.
Definitely. But it's not always on, not in every situation. We need to build institutions, education systems, cultural norms, that encourage and scaffold our rational abilities.
Like science, democratic debate, math education.
Yes. And we need to be aware of where our evolved ecological rationality might clash with modern problems that require those unnatural abstract skills.
But he's ultimately optimistic, not cynical about human irrationality.
He rejects that deep cynicism. He believes rationality can be nurtured and that it's absolutely vital for making better choices and improving the world.
So we started with that airline algorithm. Looked perfectly rational, but failed miserably in the real world.
And the key lesson, the thread running through everything we've discussed, is that rationality is always conditional. It depends on its underlying assumptions.
It doesn't exist in a vacuum. A plan that seems logical can fall apart if its assumptions about the world are wrong or too simple.
Which means, to avoid those kinds of failures, we need a way to systematically check those assumptions, to audit them.
A practical tool.
Exactly. Whether you're designing AI, making a business plan, or even just making a big personal decision, you need to pause and really examine under what conditions does my reasoning actually hold up.
Which brings us to this assumption audit checklist we promised. A way to surface those hidden conditions.
Let's walk through it. 5 key areas to probe. First, goals and values.
The purpose behind it all.
Right. Ask, what goal am I, or is this model, really optimizing for? And just as important, optimal for what and optimal for whom?
You need to list the objectives. Are they the right ones?
Are important values being left out? Things like trust, fairness, long-term effects, maybe even happiness. Is the utility being maximized the thing you actually care about in the real world?
Like the airline, if they'd included customer satisfaction in their goal.
Their optimal pricing would likely have been very different. The rationality was conditioned on a narrow goal.
Okay, point 2 on the checklist.
Information and knowledge limits. Ask, what information is this decision based on? What is it assuming about the world? And crucially, what don't we know? And how could that uncertainty mess things up?
Every decision rests on some data, some model of reality.
You need to identify what's assumed to be known, complete, reliable. Are there big uncertainties being ignored? Are unknowns being treated as certainties?
The airline assumes stable competition, maybe predictable demand based on the past, ignoring potential disruptions.
Exactly. And real-world rationality means acknowledging incomplete information. Sometimes the most rational thing is to admit what you don't know, the known unknowns, and plan for contingencies rather than pretending you have perfect foresight.
Makes sense. Third checklist item.
Resource constraints. Time, computing power, money, effort. Ask, what are the real-world limits on making and executing this decision? And is this solution still good when I factor in the costs to find it and implement it?
This is pure Herbert Simon territory, bounded rationality.
Totally. If your plan assumes infinite time for analysis or instantaneous action or unlimited budget, it's probably going to fail.
Like a perfectly planned daily schedule that assumes 0 interruptions and infinite willpower.
Or a business plan assuming perfect instant coordination. You have to factor in the costs of deliberation and execution. The theoretically best solution might be worse than a good enough one you can actually achieve quickly and affordably.
Okay, number 4. This one seems critical.
Dynamic reactions and feedback. Ask, what does this plan assume about how others will react? Competitors, customers, the environment itself, and what's assumed to stay constant that might actually change because of my decision.
This is where so many hidden assumptions live.
Definitely. A strategy might seem rational in a static snapshot of the world, but if your action changes the world, if others react strategically, the whole game changes.
The airline assumed passengers would be passive price takers. They weren't. Competitors reacted too.
Exactly. You need to think interactively. Do that. If I do X, they might do Y thought experiment. Are you assuming a stable equilibrium when your actions might actually disrupt it? Optimization often invites reactions that undermine the original plan.
Right. And the final point on the audit, number 5.
Risk tolerance and error costs. Ask, what happens if this decision goes wrong? What are the potential costs of being mistaken? And are we accounting for that risk properly?
Because a decision that looks good on average might be terrible if it has a small chance of catastrophe.
Precisely. Humans are often risk-averse for good reason. Sometimes avoiding disaster is more important than maximizing the average outcome. Does your model assume risk neutrality or should build in a margin of safety?
Look at the worst-case scenarios. Is the pursuit of optimality creating unacceptable downside risk?
You need to weigh expected value against variance, against the potential for really bad outcomes. Sometimes sacrificing a bit of potential upside to drastically reduce downside risk is the most rational choice, especially when facing deep uncertainty.
So running through these 5 points, goals, information, resources, reactions, risk, that's how you surface the conditions.
It forces you to apply rationality to the assumptions behind your reasoning. It's not abandoning rational analysis, it's making it more robust, more grounded.
And a truly rational decision is one that still makes sense after this audit.
It's one that remains sensible when you consider all these real-world factors. If the plan falls apart under scrutiny, you know why that rational algorithm or that seemingly logical strategy might not actually be rational for you in your specific context. #outro.
Well, that was quite a journey. We started with that ideal of homo economicus, the perfect rational agent.
And quickly ran into the messy reality of human biases, thanks to Kahneman and Tversky.
Then we explored Herbert Simon's idea of bounded rationality, satisficing making good enough choices within our limits.
We saw rationality isn't just one thing, it's plural, instrumental, epistemic, ecological.
And finally, Steven Pinker's perspective. Humans are capable of rationality. It's adaptive, but it's also a skill we need to cultivate.
And the core thread through it all. Rationality is conditional, always. It never happens in a vacuum.
Decisions are made by real people, real organizations, with specific goals, limited information, finite time.
In dynamic environments that react and change.
And yet, the amazing thing is, despite all those limits, we can be rational. We can use knowledge to achieve our goals.
It reminds me of John Locke's analogy reason as the candle in the dark for humanity.
Yeah. And maybe our deeper understanding now is that, okay, that candle has a finite wick. It flickers in the wind of context, but it's still our best guide.
And by understanding the conditions that help it shine brightly, we can make better decisions for ourselves and maybe build a more rational society too.
So thinking about Pinkel's idea of rationality as an unnatural skill we need to cultivate, here's a final thought for you to take away and reflect on.
What specific unnatural skills, maybe a particular way of thinking logically, a statistical tool you find useful, a philosophical principle do you think are most vital for navigating today's complex world?
And maybe more importantly, how can we get better at cultivating those skills individually and as a society so we can avoid that tragedy of the rationality commons where individual signaling trumps collective truth-seeking?
Something to think about.
Join us next time on The Deep Dive for another exploration into the world ideas.